Over to you.
Thank you very much. All that. Okay. There we go. Too far. Okay, so good evening, and again, I hope you've had a blessed Sabbath today, and thank you very much for praying for us from the Tucker Twins. So we are on our part 5 of looking at chapter 18 of Adventist Home, and the hope is that we finish today, so that next week you can have a new voice, and that you can have a new topic further from our own. It's been very interesting to hear what everyone's had to say about this. We've had lots of deep dives into each paragraph that we've done. And without further ado, let us begin by reading our next paragraph. So we are on to the results of excesses in the marriage. So sexual excess will effectually destroy a love for devotional exercises, will take from the brain the substance we need to nourish the system, and will most effectively exhaust the vitality. No woman should aid her husband in this work of self-destruction. She will not do it if she is enlightened and has true love for him. This is from paragraph 4. And the more the animal passions are indulged, the stronger do they become, and the more violent will be their clamors for indulgence. Let God-fearing men and women awake to their duty. Many professed Christians are suffering with paralysis of nerve and brain because of the intemperance in this direction, and that's paragraph 5. This really builds on a theme that's been talked about a lot in this chapter, which is the excessive indulgence of particularly sexual pleasure. In fact, at Northampton Central today, they were saying during the sermon about, I might say it wrong, lasciviousness, where you indulge these fantasies and desires far too deeply. And it couldn't be more poignant a message, I think, just because of what we're looking at in chapter 18. And it really is something that can drain, as it says here, the substance that we need to nourish our system. Because for you to be thinking clearly, to be focused, you need to not have those distractions, and you need to devote more time. Otherwise, without that time devoted to the relationship you have with God, then you're not going to benefit, and you may look back and regret and wish you'd done things differently, which is only going to put you in sort of a deeper spiral. So the more that you indulge these things, the harder it's going to be. You're going to want them more and more often. But if we as God-fearing men and women know our duty, then we can escape that problem. We can be free of those shackles. And obviously from that, we're going to have that better relationship with God, and we can actually progress much greater towards our place in heaven. I mean, there's not a lot more to say about these two paragraphs. They're very short, and I think Ellen G. White does tend to write in a kind of to the point manner. But I believe the next one is something. This is something that is obviously very important to talk about, as well as the husband's role. So we don't want to focus just on one, but on the husband as well as the woman. It says that husbands should be careful, attentive, constant, faithful, and compassionate. They should manifest love and sympathy. If they fulfill the words of Christ, their love will not be of a base, earthly, sensual character. Oh, sorry, let me start that again. If they fulfill the words of Christ, their love will not be of a base, earthly, sensual character that will lead to the destruction of their own bodies and bring upon their wives debility and disease. They will not indulge in the gratification of base passions. While ringing in the ears of their wives, they must be subject to the husband in everything. When the husband has the nobility of character, purity of heart, and the elevation of mind that every true Christian must possess, it will be made manifest in the marriage relation. If he has the mind of Christ, he will not be a destroyer of the body, but will be full of tender love, seeking to reach the highest standard in Christ. Now, obviously, a a longer paragraph. There's a bit more to talk about here. As we are all trying to be more Christ-like, we can all follow the example that he set, and as we know, that does not involve the indulgence of these pleasures. Um, and while it is one thing to avoid the seduction of your spouse, as it is mentioned before, where the wife should not be seducing the man with words or actions, the man should also um, not be over keen in talking about how they are subject to the husband and everything. So it is on the husband's responsibility, yeah, so that he does not insist that everything he says is right. There is accountability on both sides here. It's not enough to ask to not be provoked to anger, but also you should also, obviously anger is not the case here, but you should also keep that kind of temperaments. What's the word I'm looking for? Moderation of your emotions. So you should be able to rein in those passions. You should be able to withdraw yourself if it is becoming too much and it's being used for the wrong reason. And that all comes with this nobility, the purity of heart, that Christ-like patience or the Christ-like loving and unconditional love that we strive to have. And if that is the case, and if you've made such a correct choice in your spouse, then this will be made manifest in the marriage that you will both have that patience, you will both have that consideration and compassion for one another. It all comes down to distraction again. If we have the mind of Christ, then we are focused on the right things. We are not indulging in the carnal pleasures of the body, and it should be a tender love, which should be pleasing to God, not overindulgent, as sometimes it can be, especially portrayed in media. Would you like to just add in on this one to like the husband's role?
I think it's I think it's quite refreshing the fact that it's not just centered around what the woman does and can do. Because I think prior to this paragraph, I felt like a lot of the ownership was on women to ensure that we are not, for lack of a better word, seducing our husbands and dragging them
Or a
down
bad
to,
influence.
yeah. But to hear also that husbands also have to take responsibility, that there has to be that ownership on them to ensure that they are keeping the family kind of on the right path, if that makes sense. It's quite nice to see that here.
Yeah, because that's something that I definitely like about it as well. And obviously, when we look at this together, we pick up on these things of the language is very much negative, and some people talk about like the Ten Commandments being negative of don't do this, don't do that. And at first, you hear women don't do this, women don't do that, and it's nice that there isn't just women are to blame, that there is a husbands. You are also a part of this. It does take two to tango, and you need to perform your role, which is to not be seduced, but also to not allow that to happen in the first place, or to not do the same to her. We said a couple of weeks ago, it doesn't have to be the woman seducing the man all the time. There are times where actually in relationship, maybe the man is more the seductor, the one who's doing the seducing. Um, so it's really good to have the difference of each role because otherwise it'd be very easy, I think, to see this as a bit of an attack. But otherwise, this is essentially just truth, and it is something that we all have a part to play involved in. So I think that one is it's a really good paragraph to have, and it really makes a whole lot of sense. So
I don't know if anyone else wants to contribute kind of what they think of this paragraph at all.
I think one of the problems here sometimes it's who has the final say in the home. That is probably one of the problems that we face. But however, if both parties are playing their role, and they are playing to their strengths and weaknesses, it wouldn't matter exactly who has the final say in any issue. Because if the wife is strong in, I don't know, hospitality, then you can all play to that strength. As both husband and wife can play to that strength. If the husband, on the other hand, is strong on finance, managing the finances in the home, then both wife and husband can play to that strength. I think it is a case of doing it like that, where you both cooperate and you work to each other's strength. Where you are both weak, you support each other, makes the marriage strong. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you for that contribution. If you have more to say, or if anyone has anything to say, please just unmute and say something, because I can't always see when a hand goes up. But I think that's everything there with the husband's consideration and compassion. And like you say, it's all about how, if you are of the right mind and if your spouse is of the right mind, then this isn't going to be an issue. The next one, it's been grouped together. We've put all of one paragraph topic, even though it's 3 paragraphs, into one. So this will be a lot of reading / listening as I read it out loud. But I think there's a lot to talk about with this. So the topic being about doubt creeping in. No man can truly love his wife when she will patiently submit to become his slave and minister to his depraved passions. In her passive submission, she loses the value she once possessed in his eyes. He sees her dragged down from everything, elevating to a low level, and soon he suspects that she will as tamely submit to be degraded by another as by himself. He doubts her constancy and purity, tires of her, and seeks new objects to arouse and intensify his hellish passions. The law of God is not regarded. These men are worse than brutes. They are demons in human form. They are unacquainted with the elevating, ennobling principles of true, sanctified love. That's paragraph 2 from 125. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that was repeated. My apologies.
I did repeat it when I put it on the presentation, but I think it's not just because I copied it onto the presentation that I repeated it, but I also do think that paragraph does stand out quite a lot. Because just reading that first statement, so no man can truly love his wife when she will patiently submit to become his slave and minister to his depraved passions. You sit there and you actually, when you think about how the whole chapter was before, and some of the discussions that we've been having, it almost feels like as a wife, as a woman, that you are expected to submit without any kind of argument in place. But to hear that, to see something like that, to understand that maybe you submitting and just allowing yourself to be used, that's not okay, and it's not attractive in any way, shape, or form, to the point that it may cause your husband to almost not like this person anymore, not love this person the way that he is supposed to. So I think that is quite interesting of a paragraph, at least for me, I think it is.
I definitely agree, because it's a stark contrast, like you're saying. And actually, without drawing on examples that are sort of distant from the text itself, but when you can, I remember a phrase once someone said about only dead fish follow the current. So if someone that you're seeing, you take a liking to, is quite outspoken, they're bold but not in a rude way, they're actually passionate and they have an opinion, they're intelligent, and they're all these good qualities, and now suddenly they've changed because now they're being passive and they just submit to you wholly, then that's not the person that you fell in love with, or that's not the person you wanted them to be. And it's probably not the person that God would want them to be, because they should still have that, as much as two become one, you still are two people who are different. And so to then just submit yourself entirely would be taking it too far. And it can cause issues in terms of suspicion almost, because if they're willing to just commit themselves to you that deeply, who's to say that they won't happen to somebody else as well? Who's to say that they're not going to be tied to you as emotionally? Because it could just be an act, it could be a facade, and they might be looking at somebody else as well, who they might submit themselves to instead. And this is not something that you want in terms of loyalty in a relationship. It's not something you want in terms of the trust that you should have for one another. And the sort of crux of it all, God has not been considered or regarded in the way that the behaviors are being conducted. Because men who need these sort of passions fulfilled in such a way, in this constant sort of yes sir, no sir, like just do as I say, it says here they are worse than brutes. They are like demons in human form, because they don't really know, they don't truly understand the principle of love, how love should be when it is sanctified in a relationship that understands God. I'll just read this last bottom paragraph, and then we'll see if there's anything else you'd like to add. The wife also becomes jealous of the husband and suspects that if opportunity should offer, he would just as readily pay his addresses to another as to her. She sees that he is not controlled by conscience or the fear of God. All these sanctified barriers are broken down by lustful passions. All that is godlike in the husband is made the servant of low, brutish lust. So all that is godlike in the husband is made the servant of lust. So that's all that is taken over. Lust is now sort of the brain. Lust has become the main decision maker. But again, we're seeing both sides of the coin here. The wife cannot truly love if she's submissive like that. He cannot truly find her appealing if she is not her own person in some way. And the wife can become jealous of the husband because maybe he would just pay attention elsewhere. These are really common issues, I think. I don't know if I have mentioned it before, but when I was in school, we were told that divorce rate is 11 years before a divorce. So this is obviously a big issue that the modern world is facing, because there's jealousy in relationships, there's toxicity, and these things will break down a relationship and a marriage, whether it's early or late on, it doesn't matter. So is there anything that anyone likes to pick out from this? Very topical, very interesting points to make here. No problem if not. I think perhaps we could all simply agree that, these doubts are to be avoided. We know the way to avoid them is to be focused, keep God in the center, and to not put everything aside for the sake of your own desire. Would you be able to read these for me?
The problem of unreasonable demands. The matter now to be settled is, shall the wife feel bound to yield implicitly to the demands of her husband when she sees that nothing but base passions control him, and when her reason and judgment are convinced that she does it to the injury of her body, which God has enjoined upon her to possess in sanctification and honor, to preserve as a living sacrifice to God. It is not pure, holy love which leads the wife to gratify the animal propensities of her husband at the expense of health and life. If she possesses true love and wisdom, she will seek to divert his mind from the gratification of lustful passions to high and spiritual themes by dwelling upon interesting spiritual subjects. It may be necessary to humbly and affectionately urge, even at the risk of his displeasure, that she cannot debase her body by yielding to sexual excess. She should, in a tender, kind manner, remind him that God has the first and highest claim upon her entire being, and that she cannot disregard this claim, for she will be held accountable in the great day of God.
Thank you so much. So again, we've got the continuation from that last section, because you shouldn't just simply listen to the whisperings of the husband and submit to everything they ask, because there will be things that are unreasonable. Just because the husband is the head and they have something to say does not mean that it is the right thing to say. And this is where you hold each other accountable. This is where I hope that you have prayed and that you have consulted God, and maybe even consulted others, whether it's the pre-marriage counseling or whether it's just someone you trust within the church, because then you can discuss these issues before they arise. But obviously, when it comes to the unreasonable demands of the base passions, then hopefully the woman will be able to be in a place where it can be avoided, essentially, because you don't want a situation where anything is forced. As we understand, love is to be sanctified and it should be holy. Therefore, everything should be done with the greatest care, and nothing should be done at the behest of somebody else. It does say that it shouldn't be done if it is to the injury of body, but also I might add it shouldn't be done if it is to the injury of the mind or the spirit, because we do not want this to go any further in terms of damage. At the end of the day, we are all meant to be healthy, well, and able to serve God to the best of our capabilities, and something that gets in the way of that has no place in the home.
Do something interesting about this, and it's going to sound very controversial. If you don't agree with me, it's totally fine. But I do see from this chapter and looking at everything, it does fall, a lot of the responsibility seems to fall on the wife, in the sense that we have to control our passions and kind of what our desires need to be controlled. But then with our husband as well, we would have to then ensure that he understands the levels that we all can handle. It's about, is what you're doing right now taking you away from God? And if it is, we have to be that reminder. Where am I going with this point? I'm not too sure. But I thought about it, just came to me when I was reading that it feels like it is on the wife a bit more. And it's not a bad thing that it is, but it's interesting to hear that, to be really honest, within your home, a wife does have a lot of responsibilities too. It's not just about your husband. Yes, they are the head of the home, and they are the preachers and ministers in the home. But the wife is also ensuring that they have the capability to be those ministers, whether that be that they control their desires, or they help to squash, if that makes sense, their husband's excessive desires.
Yeah, there's a lot on the shoulders of women. There's a lot of responsibility, as you say, and it's all not, well, yeah, it's pressure, but also it's in one way empowering that you have the responsibility and you are trusted to do so. But on the other hand, it's also, this is a lot and I'm only human, I would imagine. Can't talk from much experience here. And that's something that maybe reading this has definitely opened my eyes to, is it on a tangent, but also linked, is today we talked about at church how God doesn't pick perfect people. Perfect people are not chosen because they're the ones who are going to do everything right from the start. We looked at Abraham today and how he made mistakes. He lied or withheld things because he didn't trust that things would be safe if he didn't use his own intelligence or what he knew of men to actually get his way out of something in terms of lying about his relationship with his wife. Now, again, where am I going with this? Now I've lost my point. It's to do with the fact that we are not perfect, and actually that is to be accepted. That we don't need to be perfect now. We are where we're supposed to be, and that we should actually work with one another. We should pick the person. This is my main thing. We should pick the person that's right for a job, not the person that we think is necessarily the best already. Like, if it turns out that picking you now is going to make a better decision in 5 years' time than picking the person that does everything right for the first two and then it all goes wrong, I should consider the long-term ramifications more so than the short term. So just because it goes right immediately as an easy win does not mean it's the best thing. That's why, yes, we're not perfect, but actually it may be that the man is the problem. The woman can back that up, and you just have to look at who's the right one for the job. That did make sense in my head.
I think one of the problems we have, well, it all depends on what the subject is. You'll find that in the Garden of Eden, the one who was given the responsibility was Adam. And this is what God did. He asked Adam, why is it may seem as the wife has a huge responsibility? Spiritually, it is the man, because he has to make sure his house worship of God is conducted. In his house, it is fed, it is cared for, things are provided for. So the man has a huge responsibility, socially, economically, financially, all these other things as a family. You have to be doing all these tasks. But also it depends on the situation you're talking about. When it comes to such as what the spirit of prophecy is describing here, it is giving, you get the impression the wife has a lot to do. Because she has a lot to do because she's the sane one in the relationship. She's one I may call the normal one in the relationship. The man has gone haywire, so he needs to be pulled back. And it is only the wife who can do that. Because why? Because it is the wife who can understand, who understands him better than anybody else. This is why she has such a huge responsibility. And also, wives have a sense, if they are wise, of when things may or may not go right. They are very anticipatory of situations, and they can sort of steer the ship in a particular direction because of this sixth sense that they may have. And they tend to see things probably in a much better detail than the way the husband sees it. However, but all it is really, like I said, it is a question of playing to each other's strength in this situation. In this situation, the husband is the weak one. So the wife has to play the stronger role to try and bring the husband back to his senses. In another situation, you probably find that the wife is the weak one and the husband has to do it. So it is all dependent, I think, from a situation. But if you look at the way God, if you look at Garden of Eden and you look at the way the responsibility was given, you will find that Adam had a very big job. He had a very big job, and it was he who was the target. It was him who was the target. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution, brother. Yeah, especially like you said with it's picking the right person. It's a case of one being the target and the other having to kind of support. But I would definitely argue now that the this could either go both ways, especially in the world we live in now. It could go both ways, where the woman is being targeted and the man supports, or the man's targeted and the woman supports. I would, for myself at least, just always take this as there's two sides to it, and therefore it could go either way. Being the head of the house is one thing, but being human and making mistakes occasionally, being tempted, everyone's subject to the same thing there. So we're all fighting the same battle in different ways. And in that case, all you can do is collaborate with one another. It does not matter that you are the husband or the wife. You should be working together and working with God, consulting God. Otherwise, it is not going to work out the way it's supposed to. And in fact, there was a song I think we were listening to this morning that talks about battles should end the way they should, not necessarily the way you want, or you shouldn't be the victor all the time. It's knowing that the way things end, God has ordained it, because it's not enough. We can't simply be spoiled and have our cake and eat it all the time. There are going to be times where, how many times do you pray, oh, I pray that this thing goes well? It doesn't. That doesn't mean God didn't answer you. That just means that God's got something else in plan. So yes, temptation is awful. Yes, the things we go through, struggle, are horrible, but there's always something else waiting for us that is better and bigger for us, that we can be happy about. And in your relationship, in your marriage, then you've got that to look forward to. If you can get through and see yourself past any unreasonable demands, like if my wife can tell me, you're being unreasonable, that's not what we should be doing, you don't need that, you don't want that, then I can work on it, understand. Next thing you know, we're celebrating something later on because something better, something that I may not wanted immediately, has become available. And that's way better for us in the long term, much like picking the right person for a job long term versus the short term. We should always take that step back, trust God, and understand what's best for us, because it isn't going to be the animal propensities. It's not going to be anything that diverts us away from actual love and the wisdom that comes with a godly relationship. And while the wife should be tender, kind, and remind the husband that God is first and highest, and the husband should also have that in mind as well. And if you need to reaffirm this to yourself as a bit of a mantra, then make that part of devotion and worship, because you're both people who need to have this in mind, and it doesn't change based on your role in the family. Either way, God has that claim over all of us. There's actually another part to unreasonable demands. Oh, I keep pressing the wrong button, sorry. Now I've gone too far. How do I go back? Oh, it does work. Okay, so we have the third paragraph of unreasonable demands, where it says, if she will elevate her affections and in sanctification and honor preserve her refined womanly dignity, woman can do much by her judicious influence to sanctify her husband and thus fulfill her high mission. In so doing, she can save both her husband and herself, thus performing a double work. In this matter, so delicate and so difficult to manage, much wisdom and patience are necessary, as well as moral courage and fortitude. Strength and grace can be found in prayer. Sincere love is to be the ruling principle of the heart. Love to God and love to the husband can alone be the right ground of action. And it's interesting that it has double work there, and we're talking about how much work the woman has to do. We're already being told that women can actually do so much. She can achieve so many great things. And she has this high mission, not just a mission, it is a high mission. And she can save both herself and her husband. It's delicate and difficult, but those who are wise, those who have patience, who've relied on God, who have prayed, they're going to have these things and they will be abundantly blessed. Having that relationship, I sort of mentioned this kind of three-pronged or three-strand relationship of husband, wife, and God. And that bottom sentence talks about love to God, love to the husband. That's the ground of action. Without that, nothing should be being done. It needs to have those two ingredients. Otherwise, you are not going to make a very nice recipe. Yeah.
Imagine, my brother, if all wives in the church recognize that their family is an evangelistic mission. Think of how evangelism will be revived in church. If all wives' mission, before she goes to do evangelism outside, it begins in the home. If husband and wife recognize that their home is the first evangelistic mission they have, the whole church will be animated by evangelism. The problem we have, my brothers, our focus is different. In some instances, we are too hot in the church. Then in some instances, we are too indifferent to the church. Or let me say, not to the church, but let me say, love to God and love to the husband. This is love to God and love to fellow men. That's the whole summary of the commandments. So sometimes we are too hot on the commandments, and sometimes we are too cold, and sometimes we are too indifferent. But if we were to work with the understanding, this is my evangelistic mission. I am accountable for this evangelistic mission. I've got the responsibility that God will ask me one day, what have I done with evangelism in my family? What can I show that I've done evangelism in my family? I've reached my family with the gospel. Then our focus will change. Then we won't find time for all this, what we have been reading about lusts and so forth. Because everybody's busy doing something. But if we are not having all these, and we are not focused on it, this is where all these other things we've been reading come about. But if we were to come with this understanding, you wouldn't find time to fight. Because everybody's trying to reach somebody with the gospel message. And I think there is a lesson that we have as husbands and wives in the home. We have to reach each other with the gospel. You may know more, I may know less. I may know more than you may know. But we have to reach each other with the gospel. And if I have to reach my wife with the gospel, I cannot shout at my wife. I cannot make her do things that she does not feel comfortable to do because I'm trying to reach her with the gospel. It is because focus is out of sync with what God requires of us in these homes. So I hope reading this, we get an understanding of what is required of us as husbands and what is required of us as wives. And once we focus on that, we put that first, that missionary spirit first, that missionary thinking first, that missionary mind first, then we don't have time to do all the other silly things that people find. You wouldn't even want to divorce your wife or your husband because he or she is somebody you're trying to reach with the gospel. Thank you.
Thank you for that point. To be honest, I do agree that I think it does need to be taught as part of like the premarital stuff. I think it is essential that there is an understanding of the roles and responsibilities, as well as an understanding of ultimately the kind of mission that us as wives have now. Because I think it's almost not downplayed per se, because I wouldn't say it's downplayed at all. But I think it's definitely something that we're not as aware of. We understand our responsibility of, when we have kids, we're going to have to be doing certain things to help support our family and keep our family in check, if that makes sense. But to have that responsibility with your husband, I think that's something that we forget to look at. We forget to look at what that dynamic looks like between a wife and their husband prior to having kids, and the responsibility you really hold as a wife. You are not just there to make the home up and clean and cook and all of these things, but Instead, you're there to empower your husband and ensure that both of you are on a path that leads you to righteousness. Yes, your husband is the priest and he will do that as well, but you have a lot more sway than you believe you would ever have as a wife. And I think that reading this chapter is really starting to give a better understanding of that. Thomas, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
I mean, yeah, there's so many factors to be considered, I think. And as you've been saying, that there is this certain amount of it's the qualities that you possess, especially talking about the wisdom and patience. I fully agree with what you've said so far, Thomas. I'm not sure I could put it any other way, but I really appreciate the contribution first of all, because it's something that they're conversations that are worth having, and were it not for these writings, then we wouldn't be able to understand more about these. And at the end of the day, it's all back to the first 2 weeks that I remember. Now we're on week 5. We talked about education being the real pivotal point in everything we do. We need to educate people about what the right way to be is. If people don't understand what is to be expected of them, or if people do not understand the right conduct, then they're going to make mistakes. And yes, we are not perfect. We can make mistakes, but it's important that we try and grow and learn. That's the main thing. We cannot be perfect if we've already made a mistake, but we can grow to be more and more close to perfect, to be Christ-like as he was perfect. It doesn't matter if I miss the first shot of the night and then never miss again, because I've improved. My score is always getting higher. So if I make a mistake, I then work hopefully with my network, which will include my wife. Hopefully it includes friends and family we trust. There's always, I don't know what mistake I'm referring to here, I'm being hypothetical, but just in general, like, you should always be able to work together, and you know each other. There's no reason really for any accountability to not be had. The more you learn, the more you know, then the more mistakes you avoid, and the more you can hold each other accountable for things. It's good habits that become hobbies in the end, because I can't say for 100% certain that I've always loved church, because as a kid I definitely didn't enjoy church, but then the more I learned, the more I grew, the more I love it. Now you'll see me actually singing in church. Things change over time and we have to expose ourselves to them, and part of that is exposing yourself to each other's, hopefully not their carnal passions, but discussing things first, understanding what it is that you expect and want, and avoiding any such problem. I may have gone on a huge tangent from what was being said, but it's just as things came to me, I sort of ran with it. Sorry about that. I may have told a slight white lie that there was one more paragraph on the unreasonable demands every time. But here it is. There is another one. Would you like to read it?
When the wife yields her body and mind to the control of her husband, being passive to his will in all things, sacrificing her conscience, her dignity, and even her identity, she loses the opportunity of exerting that mighty influence for good which she should possess to elevate her husband. She could soften his stern nature, and her sanctifying influence could be exerted in a manner to refine and purify, leading him to strive earnestly to govern his passions and be more spiritually minded, that they might be partakers together of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is the world through lust. The power of influence can be great to lead the mind to high and noble themes, above the low sensual indulgences for which the heart unrenewed by grace naturally seeks. If the wife feels that in order to please her husband, she must come down to his standard, when animal passions is the principal basis of his love and controls his actions,
she displeases God, for she fails to exert a sanctifying influence upon her husband. If she feels that she must submit to this animal passions without a word of remonstrance, she does not understand her duty to him nor to her God.
Okay, thank you very much for reading, because that was a long piece of text. So, a lot to unpack because there's obviously a lot here. And just I'm sure people do know what it means, but remonstrance is not a word we often use in our vocabulary. So it's a forceful protest. So if you feel that you must submit to passion without any kind of opposition, then she doesn't understand the duty to him nor to God. And this is really important because yes, that's her duty, but without putting too fine a point on it, the husband has a duty to not put her in that situation. This is not entirely about putting the onus on the woman. I will argue this for the entire chapter and probably the entire book at every opportunity. It's a two-way street, and that all things should be considered. It's not just a one-track problem here. But yeah, so being passive, as we established in an earlier paragraph, is not going to be of good use. It's not going to be able to influence things in a positive way, because presumably you've seen something in your spouse as you've courted them and then married them, that you've seen qualities that are useful. You've seen, not that sounds bad, you've seen qualities that are good, that can be beneficial to other parties, whether it's a section of the church that you can fulfill, because it might be that one of you is very good at ministering, one of you is very good at singing. There we go. That's two parts of the church role fulfilled. It might be that you have certain passions that work together. Whatever it is, there's always an opportunity for you to engage with that influence, for you to be able to put it to the test, not test, that's the wrong word, put it to good use. And were it not for that, it would be a kind of a waste. So it could be that you're always very angry, yet your wife somehow makes you feel calmer. That is a very sanctifying, calming influence that we need. Because as much as I'm going to get the names wrong, I think, is it John and James, the Sons of Thunder? I might get the names wrong. I know one's called James, and I've just had a mind blank. But it could be, they were called the Sons of Thunder for a reason. They had a temper, but working with one another, that can be put down, and it can also avoid any dangerous issues that might stem from it. We should be partakers of divine nature. We should not be so enveloped in the world that we are partaking in all the foolishness that they partake in. So whether it's sensual indulgence or other, it is important that the wife doesn't have to please her husband and meet him at a lower standard, because everything we do must be pleasing to God first. In which case, never lower yourself, whether you are the husband or the wife, to a base standard, as it keeps mentioning, base standard or carnal pleasure. Don't lower yourself to that kind of indulgence, because it's only temporary, and we know that the real pleasure is going to come from what we get after the second coming, and we know that will be eternal. That was a lot on the topic of unreasonable demands, but I think with the strength of Christ, with the strength of prayer, and having a good network extending beyond even just your relationship in your marriage, then you can avoid stooping that low. And we only have one more paragraph to go through. We've obviously talked a lot about the sorry, I've forgotten the whole title of the section, the unreasonable demands, sorry. And we go on to our last paragraph, which is, our bodies a purchased possession. And I won't ask you to read it again, because I will read this last one for you. The lower passions have their seat in the body and work through it. The words flesh or fleshly or carnal lusts embrace the lower, corrupt nature. The flesh of itself cannot act contrary to the will of God. We are commanded to crucify with the flesh, with the affections and lusts. How shall we do it? Shall we inflict pain on the body? No, but put to death the temptation to sin. The corrupt thought is to be expelled. Every thought is to be brought into captivity to Jesus Christ. All animal propensities are to be subjected to the higher powers of the soul. The love of God must reign supreme. Christ must occupy an undivided throne. Our bodies are to be regarded as his purchased possession. The members of the body are to become the instruments of his righteousness. It's such a poetic metaphor, talking about purchased possessions, instruments of righteousness. And I think primarily for me, it's the undivided throne for Christ. Again, someone may know the verse, but you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve material desire as well as serving God, because they are mutually exclusive. We know that the immaterial is what awaits us. Material is temporary. I'm not going to need this. So all of this for me really works as a nice way of rounding up the chapter, because it summarizes a lot of things being flesh and carnal lust. It's lower, corrupt. Obviously, things that are lower are inferior. We know that we should be exalting God. And the fact that it's opposites, high and low, tells you that the lower things are not what we are looking for or seeking. But it also mentions how we do this. It shouldn't be painful. We should not be inflicting pain on the body or physically punishing. We should put to death temptation. So this is not a physical issue. It's nothing to worry about biologically as well. So it should not be taken out on the body. But we should put to death what it does to the mind, what it does to our ideas, our thoughts, distraction in every way, whether it's thought or deed, because it all begins with our thoughts and our mindset. If our focus is not aligned properly, that's where temptation and sin will creep in. So these things need to be, as it says, expelled, because everything should be pleasing to God, and we know that God knows everything. And the higher powers of the soul, those exalted things, they're what we should place on top. They should stay on top. If that's where they are, that's where they should stay. Then we can't be compromising that in any way. There can be no compromise with the throne, no compromise with your masters. There should be no compromise with your priorities.
I think also it's just about understanding the value of your body as well. Like it says there, it's saying our bodies are being regarded as high as his purchased possession. Now, to be a possession of God, it means that you are so valuable to him that everything that he has put in you. Now, if you are something that is treasured in that way by God, why would you then cause yourself harm? Now, in this way, the lust is the thing that causes us harm, not just the physical pain that we can inflict on ourselves, but lust in excess is a thing that will cause our bodies to be in pain, for us to be damaged in some way.
And maybe not outwardly, but inwardly.
Yeah.
You know, it might not be a visible pain or injury, but it does things that we can't treat with a simple physical cure or treatment.
Yeah. And those things, the little damages that happen, cause value to leave from you. Let's take, for example, if you were to purchase something from a store, for example, a phone or a laptop
watch.
Or anything like that, or a watch.
Watches depreciate significantly quick.
So as soon as you've purchased that and taken it out of the box, the minute you've opened it, the value of it goes down. And you wouldn't be able to sell or use that well, you can use the product, don't get me wrong, but you wouldn't be able to sell the product for the same amount that you had bought it for.
Even unused.
Yeah. And that's the same with your body. I'm not saying that you're selling your body, because you're not. But that value that was once there, the preciousness of it, does unfortunately go down.
Mm.
But as long as we are able to identify the fact that these lusts, these carnal lusts, are within us, and we run away from them, that makes sense. We make sure that those aren't the things that take over. Instead, it's only Christ that we want within us. Then it's not the same as that watch.
No.
At that point, your value is still there. You're even more valuable, to be really honest,
Mm.
because you have Christ within you.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to round off our thoughts. And because this is especially the last paragraph, this is the end of the chapter. Is there anything that someone's taken away, whether it's over the course of the 5 weeks, whether it's this paragraph in particular? Please do give us your contributions. And as we're coming close to closing, is there anything that anyone would like to add? Well, I can only take that as we have summarized things brilliantly. Oh, I see a hand raised. There we go. I actually see it for once. Go ahead, Brother Zamiri.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think this has been a worthwhile study that has actually put it very clear the responsibility of both parties in a marriage to make sure that each one reach the standard that God wants us to be. You see, wives have got a responsibility to help their husbands to become proper priests in the home. From the way we have seen here, especially the 2 last paragraphs, that actually spoke of a wife not actually trying to fulfill the animal passions of her husband, but instead should help the husband so that the husband will understand and realize that that whatever should be done should be done with restrictions, letting the Holy Spirit work through them both. It's very, very important. And that also, I think we also learned with reference to not conforming to the world or the things that are done in the world. We try to take them and bring them into our homes and practice the same. And that we should not do that. We should know that we have been purchased with the special blood of Jesus Christ, and therefore it is the responsibility of husband and wife to work together for their salvation. Let's help one another in their weakness so that they can be strong. So I think it has been a worthwhile study, and also even for the young people, they must have been actually helped a lot, those who have been coming in, to understand and realize the need of getting to know each other and the responsibilities one has to take before they enter into the marriage relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, brother. It's wonderful to hear that it's a worthwhile study nonetheless, but it's wonderful to hear that something that we've been a part of, that we've been able to have a hand in, has been worthwhile as well.
I can definitely say we have learned quite a bit from it as well.
Mm.
I think particularly, as you said, the last 2 paragraphs today have been really eye-opening. I think throughout this whole process, Thomas and I have been talking a lot about the things that we've been studying, the responsibilities that we have, and just being able to read something like this helps to understand kind of boundaries as well within Christ, understanding kind of our mission and ultimately what God really expects of us. Because, you know, within our first year of marriage, there's expectations that we may have, expectations that continue to change, because ultimately marriage is something that does change, not
not marriage itself, but how we grow and develop does change. And I think these chapters, this book really does help to facilitate those conversations between us. So I think it's been a blessing to do something like this.
Yeah, and I hope that anyone's been even half as blessed as we have, because it has been, as we've said from the very start, a very important thing for education, and we've benefited from it. I hope everyone else feels blessed. Yeah, I think, if there any closing comments before we go to closing prayer, please raise your hand or unmute before we hand over to the kind of hosts. Okay, now I can comfortably say that we must have done a good job, because no one's adding anything else. So can you please join me then in bowing your head, closing your eyes for a word of prayer as we close this program. Dear Lord, we are so grateful that we have met people of a like mind who we can share and learn from as we study your word and the words from your prophets, from learned people who we can obviously experience the words of. We can work with one another to understand more, and we can spread the knowledge further. It is our hope that everyone has received something from this, and I hope that as this program continues each Sabbath evening, that everyone will continue being blessed, and the opportunities will arise, and in relationships we will all know our roles, hold each other accountable, and that we will be pleasing unto you first and foremost. It is in Jesus' name that we pray for all of these things. Amen.
Amen.
So that is us finished with chapter 18. I hope everyone's enjoyed, and I will hand back over to the twins, I believe. Thank you so much.
Yes, we'd like to thank brother and sister Hawkins Caesar for taking chapter 18.
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it?
It was interesting. I think it's been 5 weeks. I think
Yeah.
it's 5 weeks.
At 4:45, it is morning prayers, and at 6 o'clock, Desire of Ages.
Yes. Now at 12 o'clock, we hope as many people can join as possible for the midday prayer. We've got a speaker from India, Elder Deva Kujur, and he's going to speak on AI, which is artificial intelligence. And we just found out yesterday that he is Sister... I can always get the name wrong. Sister Robert, who preached last night, it's at Ch18 Puri. It's his
His
cousin, first cousin.
his wife's first.
So it's a small world. We didn't know at this time that it was, and we saw. Well, Sister Rani put a video on, and we looked at it, and we thought, he did a lot about AI, and we thought, wonder if we can get him from prayer retreat. And so we texted her, said, you know him? She said yes, and she's arranged it for us. So we'll be doing midday tomorrow and midday on Tuesdays, doing it in 2 parts. He lives in the country, lives in the mountains in India, so that's why he's just doing the 2, because he has to come down the mountain, I believe, to
Get the internet.
get the internet. So he's. We did ask him to do if he'd like to do evenings, but the time there is so it's very late at night or early in the morning. So he agreed to do the middays. So we'd like, if possible, everybody to join. And then at 6:30 song service, and if people join song service, we'll be able to have one like we had yesterday.
Yes.
And last night. And then the preacher for the week is Pastor Anthony Jackson from Las Vegas,
America.
USA. So he's the preacher for the week. He's been on before, and he gives some timely messages.
And that's about it.
Yeah. Elder Damiris, do you have anything to say?
Well, I think you have covered everything. We just want to thank the young couple for going through this chapter, and I'm sure they have been enriched as well as we have been enriched with with this subject. And I hope and trust that all that we are learning daily, we will put it into practice. So next week, by God's grace, we were looking on chapter 19.
19.
And let's all come in our numbers. Let's continue to invite people to come in that we can study together. Thank you very much, the twins, for the work that you are doing. We have no words to say thank you, but God will reward you. Thank you.
Have a nice evening, everyone, and see you all later by God's grace. Tomorrow morning we're doing prison ministries in Dovegate, so we should be actually hosting the programme outside Dovegate in the car park.
In the prison yard.
In the prison yard, that's it. So that's the plan. So have a nice
They have to
evening.
let you out first, though, don't
They
they?
do. If there's a what is it called, what they call a
Lockdown.
then you don't get out quick. But we've only had one lockdown since we've been doing prison ministries. So have a nice evening, everyone, and see you all later by God's grace.
God bless everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.